This was the first appearance in Australia of the British heavy recovery tractor, which was sent out from England by the Fighting Vehicles Research and Development Establishment for tropical trials in North Queensland and Central Australia. This vehicle, weighing nearly 20 tons, is fitted with a hydraulically operated, slewing-type crane capable of lifting 15 tons and a hydraulically operated winch of 15 tons rated load. A rear-mounted spade provides anchorage to a maximum of 40 tons. The power unit is a Rolls-Royce B81 8-cylinder petrol engine. The slight damage that occurred on the voyage was probably caused by the steel slings rubbing on the bodywork during loading and unloading operations. The front mudguards suffered most, but there was no irreparable damage. A short period of indoctrination allowed trials personnel to become acquainted with an equipment that was entirely new to them. Crew training was carried out at the Military Training Centre in Puckapunyal, Victoria. The realism of the practice tasks added considerable interest to the training and afforded the troops ample opportunity to gauge the potential of this powerful tractor. This was the first occasion when the spade was used. In this particular practice, it is being used to facilitate the recovery of a derelict Studebaker from the bed of a river. The recovery of this old truck, which would weigh at the most 5 tons, is well within the tractor's range, but the high banks of the riverbed made the operation much more difficult than a similar recovery on level ground. The first real test of the tractor came on the 2,000-mile journey north through New South Wales to Innisfail in North Queensland. More than a half of this journey was on formed gravel or earth roads, many of them badly corrugated and very dusty. Passage over these corrugations was reasonably smooth, providing sufficient speed was maintained. At 8 to 10 miles an hour, vibration was very noticeable. After a prolonged spell in such conditions, what a relief it was to get back onto the bitumen, if only for a short break. Innisfail, centre of the trials activities, was reached on November 26, 1960. The first period of static storage commenced early in January. Statistics over many years show January to be the wettest month, but this year rain fell on only 4 of the 14 January days that the vehicle was left in the jungle. Variation of relative humidities inside the cab over each 24-hour period was normally about 10%. Average relative humidity inside the cab was 80%. At the end of the storage period, inspection showed that superficial rust had appeared on unprotected metal surfaces and slight surface mold had developed on canvas seats and leather straps. Water had leaked into locker 10, causing heavy rust and mold growth on the items stowed inside. The batteries stayed in the vehicle for the whole period and were not recharged. There was no trouble in starting the engine, and the tractor moved out as though it had only been parked for a few hours. The crane trials that followed the first static storage period showed that the crane had suffered no damage in the jungle. One of its first tasks was to lift a damaged Land Rover into a truck for transport to workshops. Whenever possible, the crane was used on tasks that had a definite practical value and fitted in with the trials program. These tasks were not necessarily confined to military requirements. Several local organizations had good reason for appreciating the presence of the tractor. The lifting of these massive bluestone rocks for the Johnston Shire Council was a case in point. The council had to move the rocks, and a trial requirement existed for lifting and slewing a 3-ton load at maximum radius. Average weight of the rocks was 2 tons. Some weighed up to 6 tons each. These rocks and 38 concrete rocks were lifted by the crane for the Shire Council, who required them for riverfront improvement. The crane finished the job without any trouble at all and fulfilled the trial requirement. It is not surprising that stories of the tractor's prowess spread through the neighborhood. Neither is it surprising that other requests for assistance were received. The next call for help came from the Innisfail Rowing Club. Their launching platform had sprung a leak and lay submerged in the North Johnstone River. The club wanted it lifted from the river and transported to workshops for repair. The rather awkward load was lifted without undue difficulty and taken away, and so another customer was satisfied. It would be untrue to say that the heavy recovery tractor is at home in swampy conditions. Denied the use of its winch, it can get into trouble, as in this case. This is the notorious Ubanangi swamp area, where many a vehicle has come to grief. And here is our vehicle, really in trouble and sinking fast in very deep mud. There were several abortive attempts to tow the tractor out of its predicament. The winch could not be used because there was no anchor, so an anchor had to be made. A trench was dug and a tree was felled, all part of the dead man's trench technique, in which the vehicle in trouble is tied to a sizable log buried in the ground, and the log is used as a winching anchor. But either the log was not big enough or the trench was not deep enough, because the tractor's winch pulled the dead man through the oozy soil without moving 1 inch itself. Meanwhile, the vehicle was slowly sinking in what could, heaven forbid, be a patch of bottomless mud. The weather report was grim. Heavy rain was expected, and the OC had been warned that the water level at this point would rise to 6 feet by dusk, and dusk was ominously near. Fortunately, rescue came in the shape of a local contractor with his bulldozer fitted with a winch, but only just in time. About this stage in the trials, with 1,309 trial miles on the clock, the unloader valve began to give trouble, which caused the compressor power takeoff to operate continuously at maximum load. This caused failures of components in the driveline, which were further aggravated by the lack of a grease nipple for the sliding splines on the drive shaft. A considerable amount of road running was carried out in order to attain the required mileages for specialized trials. Here the tractor is seen on a first-class road in the Mina Creek area. This is a reasonably good second-class road. In this neighborhood, there are many other, much worse roads. The tractor's performance was generally very good, but on hard, rough surfaces, vibration caused loosening of fittings and cracking of pipework and welds. The second static storage period started late in February and was of 28 days duration. Rain fell on 18 days and gave a total of 15 inches for the period. Average humidity inside the cab was 90%. Inspection on completion of this static storage trial showed that deterioration was much more pronounced than on the first period of 14 days. In fact, the vehicle could not be classed as serviceable until lubrication and servicing had been carried out. This took 4 men 2 days to complete, but they had much rust to remove and many seized parts to free. Despite low specific gravity readings, the driver was able to use the batteries to start the engine. Running in the jungle must be confined to cleared tracks left by timber getters or to tracks covered by light secondary undergrowth. Greasy surfaces and steep gradients add to the difficulties of jungle travel, and where streams are encountered, they must be crossed quickly or the vehicle will sink in the soft bottoms. In this particular instance, the tractor negotiated the creek safely, but struck trouble on the far bank. The wheels spun on the slippery incline and on the surface of logs placed in the vehicle's path. Energetic attempts to clear the track of mud were of no avail. It was many hours before the tractor finally got out of this trap. Having climbed this slippery 1 in 2 grade himself, this officer could be forgiven for doubting the tractor's ability to negotiate it. But he need not have worried, for the tractor went straight up with no fuss at all, and just to prove it was no fluke, repeated the performance. Such is the uncertainty of jungle conditions, however, that had this same track been tackled the very next day, or even later on the same day, it could have failed. The tractor was less successful in another similar task, which entailed climbing a 1 in 2 jungle slope. Wheel spin prevented the vehicle climbing further, and the wheels dug in about 12 inches. While in this position, it was noticed that oil was escaping from the breather hole in the hydraulic reservoir at the rear of the cab. The soil in this area consisted mainly of red clay, which, when damp, forms a very slippery surface. Too slippery on this occasion. Fortunately, the tractor was in a position where self-recovery was possible, a suitable tree being straight in line with the vehicle. It had been found previously that even slight angular deviation of the winch line could make self-recovery very difficult, often impossible, and sometimes dangerous. On several previous occasions, it was necessary to stop winching to prevent the tractor overturning. It was decided that, to fulfill the trial requirements for a 12-ton lift, the Saladin armoured car, fully equipped for battle but without crew, would make a convenient load. Tow ropes were used for slings. The Saladin was lifted on the right-hand side of the tractor. In doing so, the tie rod from the tractor chassis to the front stabilizer leg was bent slightly due to insufficient clearance between the tie rod and the bodywork forward of the intermediate wheel. This gave no allowance for deflection or movement. The lift was otherwise normal. The tractor was used on many occasions for rescue operations, but the recovery of the Saladin was perhaps the most interesting, as it eventually involved the simultaneous recovery of the tractor. At first it seemed that the Saladin would come out with little fuss. But then its wheels commenced to dig in, and to make matters worse, the tractor started to sink on its right side, and it too was bogged. The first step in putting this right was to deflate all tires. Then the wheels were cleared of as much mud as possible. Branches were chopped from trees and placed under the wheels of each vehicle. But the wheels still refused to grip, and it was decided to winch out. A tow rope was run from the tractor to the Saladin, and the winch rope was run out from the rear of the tractor to a tree which was to be used as an anchor. This time success was complete. The heavy recovery tractor's winch not only pulled the tractor itself out of the mud, but took the 12-ton Saladin with it. This was quite a remarkable feat, but how fortunate that a tree was so conveniently placed. Extreme caution had to be observed when travelling on this newly formed road, which was known locally as the H Road for some unknown but probably uncomplimentary reason. There was little fear of meeting heavy traffic, but what was around the corner was anybody's guess. It could be a washaway, a landslide, or no road at all. There was just enough width for the tractor, but on one side the land dropped steeply on heavily wooded slopes to a creek bed 200 feet below. In this mud trial, the tractor was driven off the bitumen into a bog caused by heavy rain. As you see, it entered the bog at right angles to the road. This was done intentionally, so that one of the numerous trees could be used as a winch anchor should this be necessary. Knowing the possessive nature of the Queensland mud, it was confidently expected that the tractor would bog, and so it proved. With its wheels spinning ineffectively, the recovery vehicle stopped in 2 feet of mud. 80 feet of winch cable was used to connect the tractor to a tree on the opposite side of the road. Self-recovery proved a comparatively simple operation thanks to the winch and a sturdy eucalypt. In these trials on Mission Beach, the tractor performed well on the sand near the water's edge, and even in the drier, loose sand towards the top of the beach. A 2.5-ton truck, laden with 14 44-gallon drums and 15 jerrycans, all filled with water, was used as a comparator vehicle. Unfortunately, it entered very loose sand almost immediately and could not get itself out. The heavy recovery tractor, attempting recovery, could not operate in the loose sand near the comparator vehicle. It was then driven onto firmer sand, and its tires were deflated from 90 to 36 pounds per square inch. This increased the width of the tire tracks from 15.5 to 18.5 inches. It was estimated later that this improved performance by approximately 1 gear ratio. The comparator vehicle was finally extricated, complete with its load of canned water. The tractor got into this predicament because its driver swung it outwards to avoid a stationary car. The water-soaked edge of the road collapsed, and down went the vehicle on its right side with a 28-degree list. By swinging the crane out at right angles to the tractor, some balance was restored, and the winch was able to do the rest. In view of the fact that the vehicle was perilously near to the overturn angle, this was a very creditable performance. The measuring stick showed that the offside wheels had been 3 feet lower than those on the near side. The recovery tractor was called upon to play the part of the Good Samaritan when a large truck with its semi-trailer laden with 13 tons of wood ran off the bitumen into the mud on the side of the road. The first attempt at recovery skidded the recovery vehicle along the road and broke the tow rope. The wood was then offloaded from the timber truck, and using its spade as an anchor off the bitumen, the tractor made another attempt, this time successfully. To his very obvious relief, the driver of the big diesel prime mover was able to reload and drive off with only superficial damage to his charge. The hot-wet trials finished on April 28, 1961, and the trials vehicles made the return journey to Melbourne via Western Queensland, the Northern Territory and South Australia. The heavy recovery tractor is seen passing the Devil's Marbles not very far from the geographical centre of Australia, which is central Mount Stewart. Dust is everywhere in these desolate regions of Central Australia and is the prime cause of engine wear. samples were taken for eventual analysis from this and other areas on the trial's route. The tractor and the Saladin were shipped aboard SS Townsville Star on July 28, 1961 at Port Melbourne. In preparing the tractor for loading, care was taken by the stevedoring authorities to protect the mudguards and avoid repetition of the damage that occurred in unloading the vehicle on arrival in Melbourne. A comprehensive report has been prepared on the performance of this vehicle in the tropics. The account is generally favourable, and the heavy recovery tractor is considered to be suitable for use in a tropical environment. It has already arrived back in England and, no doubt, has been examined very thoroughly by those responsible for the design of this fine vehicle.